I spent Christmas alone, watching my family celebrate without me. Then, a week later, they sent me a $25,000 bill for my sister's brand new car. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Clara Benson. I'm 28, I work hard, and I've always tried to support my family. But this year, everything felt different. Christmas morning, I expected the usual chaos, laughter, and hugs, but instead, I found silence and distance. My parents, Dean and Mara, barely acknowledged me. My sister Tess ignored my presence entirely, chatting and laughing as if I wasn't there. I sat at the table, pretending to be fine, but inside I felt crushed. I had helped Tess with school fees and small loans in the past, and I thought my family appreciated me. Seeing them celebrate without even a word for me was a shock I couldn't understand. Over the years, I had noticed patterns. Tess always seemed to get more attention, more help, and more praise. My parents overlooked my contributions and sacrifices, always treating me as the responsible one, the one expected to fix things. That night, as I quietly left the house, the hurt settled deep in my chest. I didn't know what they were thinking or why they acted like I didn't exist. But I knew one thing, I couldn't let this betrayal go unanswered. My mind started turning, trying to figure out how I could make them see what I had endured and take responsibility for their actions. That Christmas, the warmth and joy were gone, replaced with a plan forming quietly inside me. Growing up, I always felt like I was living in Tess's shadow. She could do almost nothing, and my parents, Dean and Mara, would praise her endlessly. Every achievement I had seemed to go unnoticed, while hers was celebrated with attention and pride. I remember bringing home good grades or small accomplishments, and they would nod politely, then quickly turn to Tess, asking about her day or her latest plans. Money was another constant source of imbalance. When Tess needed something, whether it was school supplies, clothes, or later, small loans, my parents would expect me to cover it. They treated my help as normal, never as a gift. I learned early on that my efforts would often be taken for granted, and it made me feel invisible in my own home. Despite it all, I worked hard, determined to make my own way. I took on extra responsibilities, studied late into the night, and saved carefully. Tess, on the other hand, was carefree and spoiled. She rarely worried about consequences or planning ahead. My parents shielded her from most responsibilities, letting me handle what they assumed I could manage. Looking back, it's clear how unfair it was. I carried the weight of responsibility, and yet, I received little acknowledgement. Tess floated through life with support at every turn, while I learned the hard way that effort didn't always equal recognition. Those early years shaped me, teaching me self-reliance but also leaving a quiet pain that never fully went away. It planted a seed of frustration I didn't know how to express at the time. That sense of being overlooked and undervalued stayed with me for years, quietly building, until it became impossible to ignore. A few days after Christmas, I opened my mailbox and froze. Inside was a formal letter demanding I pay $25,000 for Tess's new car. At first, I thought it was a mistake. My hand shook as I read it again, hoping somehow I had misunderstood. But the numbers and the tone of the letter left no doubt, it was real. Anger bubbled inside me. How could they do this? After all these years of quietly handling my own responsibilities, I was suddenly expected to cover my sister's extravagant purchase. Confusion mixed with hurt. Was this some cruel joke, or had my family really crossed a line that could not be ignored? I called my parents immediately. Dean answered first, his voice calm but dismissive. "Clara, it's just what Tess needs. You can manage it, can't you?" Mara's response was no different. She spoke as if it were obvious that I would take care of it, brushing aside my shock and discomfort. Hearing their words, I realized the truth. They didn't see me as their daughter anymore, they saw me as a source of money, a fallback whenever Tess wanted something beyond her means. The sense of betrayal was immediate and sharp. It was never about fairness or family, it was about convenience. I hung up, my mind racing. My chest ached, but I refused to panic. I knew one thing: I could not let them dictate what I was responsible for anymore. Their expectation that I would blindly pay for Tessa's luxury felt like the final straw. For the first time, I understood that standing up to my family would not be optional. I had to think carefully, act deliberately, and find a way to respond that they could not dismiss or ignore. That night, I couldn't sleep. The letter weighed heavily on me, but what hurt most was understanding how little my family truly valued me. They didn't see me as a sister or a daughter, they saw me as a wallet, a safety net for Tessa's desires. The betrayal cut deeper than I had expected, and I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I sat on my bed, staring at the wall, tears streaming down my face. Memories came flooding back, small moments when my opinions were ignored, my successes overlooked, and my efforts taken for granted. Every time I tried to assert myself, it had been brushed aside or ridiculed. The realization hit me hard: this pattern had been in place my entire life, and now it had escalated to expecting me to pay thousands for something I had no responsibility for. For hours, I thought about how easy it would be to explode, to storm into their house and demand an explanation. But anger alone would accomplish nothing. I didn't want another argument that ended with me feeling small and unheard. I needed a plan, one that gave me control and ensured I wouldn't be manipulated again. By the early hours of the morning, my tears had dried, and my mind was clearer. I began to map out my next steps. I would act strategically, gather facts, and protect myself. This was no longer just about a car or money, it was about reclaiming my voice and standing up for myself. I promised silently that I would not let them take advantage of me again, and that whatever path I chose, it would be calculated, deliberate, and unstoppable. For the first time, I felt a shift. The hurt was still there, but beneath it, determination was growing, quietly fueling a plan they would never see coming. I knew I couldn't confront my family blindly. I needed proof, something solid that showed the truth behind Tessa's spending and my parents' favoritism. Quietly, I began looking into her finances. I checked records I had access to, reviewed past contributions I had made, and started tracking patterns that didn't add up. What I found shocked me. Tess had several hidden debts, some stretching back years. She bought expensive items and took out loans, all without considering how she would pay for them. Even worse, my parents had been covering her mistakes repeatedly, often using funds that were technically mine or that I had contributed in good faith. Every time I thought I understood their sense of fairness, I uncovered more evidence that I had been treated as a fallback option. The more I discovered, the stronger my anger grew. It wasn't just about the $25,000 car, it was about years of manipulation and expectation. They had deliberately held me responsible, expecting me to shoulder burdens while Tess enjoyed privileges without consequences. It felt like a lifetime of being undervalued, hidden behind polite smiles and casual conversations. But I refused to let anger control me. Instead, I used it as fuel. I made notes, organized documents, and kept everything hidden from them. Every mismanaged account, every covered debt, became a piece of the puzzle I would one day use. By the end of the week, I had a clear picture of the imbalance in our family finances. I felt empowered, for the first time in years, knowing I had information they could not deny. My resentment had turned into a quiet, calculated determination. I wasn't going to react blindly anymore. I was going to act strategically, and when the time came, I would ensure my family understood exactly what they had underestimated. After gathering all the financial information, I knew I needed professional advice. I reached out to my friend Eli, a lawyer I trusted, and explained the situation. His calm, measured response helped me breathe for the first time in days. He reviewed the documents, the letters from my family, and the history of contributions, and then gave me news I had secretly hoped for. Eli explained that I had no legal obligation to cover Tessa's car or any of her hidden debts. The expectation from my parents was completely unfair, and I had every right to refuse. Hearing this, I felt a mix of relief and renewed strength. It confirmed that I wasn't being difficult or unkind, I was standing up for what was right. We also discussed the importance of keeping records. I began documenting every communication with my family, every letter, and every conversation about money. I made notes about instances where I had been asked to cover expenses, and I started creating a timeline of my parents' favoritism toward Tess. Each piece of evidence became another layer of protection and leverage. Emotionally, this process transformed me. The fear and hurt were still there, but they were now paired with purpose. I wasn't helpless anymore. I had the facts, the law, and a plan forming carefully in my mind. Every step I took added confidence. By the end of the week, I felt a quiet but firm determination. I knew the next stages would require courage and patience, but I was ready. I would approach the situation strategically, with evidence in hand, and ensure that my family could no longer ignore my voice or manipulate me. I had finally turned my anger and betrayal into a controlled, powerful force. I decided it was time to face the situation directly, but carefully. I invited my parents and Tess over for what I called a casual dinner, making it sound like a friendly family gathering. I wanted them to arrive unsuspecting, unaware that this night would be different. Before they came, I arranged all the evidence I had gathered. I placed copies of Tess's debts, the loans she had taken, and records of the times my parents had asked me to cover her expenses on the table. I also kept a separate folder documenting years of favoritism and manipulation. Each sheet was a reminder of the imbalance that had gone unchecked for too long. Even as I organized everything, I felt a knot of tension in my stomach. I didn't want to destroy the family entirely, but I needed them to understand the reality of their actions. It was hard to figure out how to present everything without turning the evening into an argument. My goal wasn't to yell or humiliate, it was to make them see clearly what they had done and how unfairly they had treated me. I rehearsed my words quietly, trying to stay calm and measured. Every sentence had to carry weight but remain controlled. I reminded myself that my anger was a tool, not a weapon to lash out blindly. By the time they arrived, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and readiness. The laughter and chatter at the door seemed normal, but beneath it, I knew the night would not stay light. I was prepared to reveal the truth, to confront the reality of their choices, and to finally claim the respect I had long been denied. It was a delicate balance, firm, unyielding, but carefully controlled. The family dinner had become a stage, and I was ready to take control. Dinner started like any other, with polite conversation and small talk. I waited until the food was on the table and everyone settled in. Then I spoke, my voice calm but steady. "There's something important we need to discuss," I said, placing the folder in front of him. I opened it and began laying out the facts. I showed copies of the letters demanding I pay for Tess's car and explained the amounts. Then I revealed Tess's hidden debts and financial mismanagement, including loans and purchases my parents had quietly covered. I watched their faces closely as the evidence spread across the table. Tess froze, her usual confidence faltering. She stammered, trying to shift responsibility, suggesting I had misunderstood or exaggerated. But I stayed composed, letting the documents speak for themselves. Each fact was undeniable, a clear record of actions they could not dismiss. My parents reacted defensively. Mara waved her hand and said it was always for Tess's benefit, while Dean tried to justify their decisions, claiming I should understand family obligations. I listened without interrupting, keeping my tone even, refusing to be baited into an argument. As the tension built, the power in the room shifted. The calm I maintained contrasted sharply with their flustered reactions. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't pleading, and I wasn't begging for recognition. I was showing them that their behavior had consequences, and that I could stand my ground. For the first time, the table felt balanced. I had transformed years of silent frustration into quiet authority. Every glance, every hesitant word from them confirmed that I now held control. The night that had started as a casual dinner had become a turning point, and they could no longer ignore the truth I had patiently prepared to reveal. After presenting all the evidence, I took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "I am willing to help Tess only if you, Mom and Dad, take responsibility for covering her debts. If not, I will have to involve legal measures to protect myself." There was a pause. My words hung in the air like a challenge. Mara shook her head immediately, insisting it was my duty to fix the situation. Dean's voice rose slightly, arguing that family meant shared responsibility and that I should not refuse. I remained steady. I didn't raise my voice or show frustration. Instead, I calmly reminded them of the documented history, every hidden loan, every expense they had asked me to cover, and every instance of favoritism toward Tess. Each fact reinforced my position and made it impossible for them to argue against reality. Tess shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her confident mask began to falter as I continued. She glanced at my parents, silently pleading, but the proof was undeniable. She tried to excuse her choices, but her words were hollow. For the first time, she seemed aware that her usual tactics were failing. The room was tense. My parents were struggling to respond without admitting fault, and Tessa's nervous glances betrayed her uncertainty. I felt a surge of quiet satisfaction, not from malice, but from finally reclaiming control over a situation that had been weighted against me for years. By staying composed, I had shifted the dynamic. I was no longer the one expected to give in or shoulder blame blindly. They could see, in that moment, that my determination was backed by facts, and that the consequences of ignoring it were real. Tessa's facade was cracking, and my family was beginning to understand that this time, I would not be manipulated. As the conversation continued, I noticed a change in my parents' expressions. For the first time, Dean and Mara looked uncertain. The confidence they usually carried when speaking to me had vanished. They were beginning to grasp that I wasn't the same daughter who would quietly comply with their demands. I took a steady breath and explained, calmly but firmly, how their repeated favoritism and financial manipulation had affected me. I described the pressure of always being the responsible one, the weight of covering Tessa's choices, and the emotional toll of feeling invisible in my own family. I made them hear what it had felt like to be taken for granted, overlooked, and expected to sacrifice without acknowledgement. Tess tried to interrupt, insisting I was exaggerating, claiming her mistakes weren't that serious. But I presented a timeline of evidence, showing patterns that spanned years. Every time she tried to deflect, I countered with documented facts, letters, bills, and records of financial mismanagement. Her excuses faded under the weight of truth. By the end of the conversation, the room was quiet. My parents sat in stunned silence, absorbing the reality they had ignored for so long. They realized they had underestimated my clarity and strength. For the first time in years, I felt a subtle shift in our family dynamic. I had regained respect not through anger or confrontation alone, but by showing the full scope of their behavior and standing firm. It was a small victory, but a significant one. I was no longer the passive participant in their decisions. I had authority, and they were beginning to acknowledge it, even if reluctantly. That evening marked a turning point, where my voice was finally recognized, and my family could no longer ignore the consequences of their choices. After the dinner, I knew I needed to make my position undeniable. With Eli's guidance, I prepared a formal legal notice stating clearly that I would not be paying for Tessa's car. Every word was precise, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The notice was delivered officially, ensuring that my refusal was recognized by law and could not be dismissed. Eli reviewed each step, confirming that all potential loopholes were covered. He advised me on how to protect myself from any attempts at manipulation or pressure. I felt a growing sense of security knowing that I had professional support and that every action I took was backed by legal authority. When my parents received the notice, their reaction was immediate and tense. Mara's voice trembled when she called, insisting I reconsider, while Dean's tone turned defensive, demanding explanations. But the reality was unchangeable. The legal notice made it clear that my responsibility had limits, and no pleading or pressure could override it. For the first time, I could see their panic, the worry in their eyes, the uncertainty in their words. They had expected me to comply, to quietly accept the burden, and now that expectation had been completely shattered. Their reaction confirmed that the decision to involve legal measures was not only necessary but powerful. This moment marked a transformation. I went from feeling wronged and helpless to standing firmly in control of my life and choices. The combination of knowledge, preparation, and legal support had given me authority I had never fully exercised before. I felt an undeniable shift. Anger had turned into confidence, betrayal into strength, and fear into determination. I was no longer vulnerable to their schemes. I had reclaimed my power, and they could no longer undermine me. Once the legal notice was in place, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I no longer had to worry about being drawn into my family's financial drama. The control I had reclaimed allowed me to create boundaries, separating my life from their expectations. I began planning my days and decisions without considering what Tess or my parents might demand. At the same time, I realized Tess needed to face the results of her choices. I didn't seek to humiliate her, but I made it clear that her actions had consequences. She struggled at first, resisting the reality I presented, but gradually she acknowledged the mistakes she had made. Watching her confront her responsibilities was satisfying in a quiet, controlled way, a form of justice without cruelty. My parents, meanwhile, could no longer ignore the imbalance they had caused. Word of their behavior reached their community through natural channels, and the embarrassment and guilt became apparent in the way they were treated by neighbors and family friends. They couldn't hide from the repercussions of relying on me while shielding Tess. Through all of this, I felt an unexpected sense of freedom. For the first time, I could breathe without the tension of being taken for granted. I had acted decisively, standing up for myself while maintaining dignity. The anger and hurt that had haunted me for years were replaced with clarity and strength. By the end, I understood that justice didn't always need dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it came from asserting your boundaries, demanding respect, and allowing others to face the truth. That realization gave me closure. I was no longer the overlooked sister or the family fallback. I had proven to myself that standing firm could change everything. After everything had settled, I decided it was time for a fresh start. I moved into my own apartment, a space that belonged entirely to me. No expectations, no judgments, no obligations beyond my own choices. It was liberating to finally create a home that reflected who I was, rather than what my family expected me to be. I began investing in myself, both personally and professionally. I enrolled in a few courses that interested me and launched a small business I had been dreaming about for years. Every step I took reminded me that I was capable, independent, and deserving of success. The sense of accomplishment was profound, built not from others' validation but from my own effort and determination. Living on my own also allowed me to rediscover happiness. Without constant pressure from my family, I felt lighter and more in control. I spent evenings doing things I enjoyed, meeting new people, and cultivating relationships that were supportive and genuine. The contrast between the freedom I now had and the suffocating expectations I once endured was striking. As I settled into this new chapter, I reflected on the lessons learned. Standing up for myself had not only changed how my family viewed me, but it had also strengthened my sense of self-worth. Boundaries, accountability, and respect were not just abstract ideas, they were tools I had used to reclaim my life. I realized that betrayal, while painful, could teach resilience and clarity. Looking back, I understood that my strength came from embracing independence and refusing to be sidelined. I had transformed pain into purpose and betrayal into empowerment. In the quiet of my apartment, I felt a lasting sense of peace, knowing I had reclaimed my life and could move forward on my own terms. It was the ending I had needed, and the beginning I had earned.